The applause began before he reached the stage. It rolled toward him like a wave, measured, respectful, inevitable. The kind of applause that wasn't asking if he deserved it, only confirming that everyone already agreed he did. Adrian Keller adjusted his cufflink out of habit, not nerves. He had learned long ago that people mistook stillness for confidence and confidence for certainty. Tonight, certainty was the only thing in the room. Gold letters shimmered behind him on the massive screen. Adrian Keller, visionary, builder, legacy. He had seen the words before. In articles, in documentaries, in framed citations lining the halls of buildings that bore his name. They no longer stirred anything in him, not pride, not humility. They were simply accurate, or at least accepted. The host's voice echoed warmly through the auditorium. Some people change industries, she said. Some change lives. Adrian Keller did both without ever asking for recognition. The audience laughed softly at that. A rehearsed line. A known irony. Recognition had followed him whether he asked for it or not. He reached the podium as the applause peaked, then softened into reverent silence. For a moment, he let himself look out. Thousands of faces, investors, journalists, politicians, former employees who spoke of him with the careful gratitude, reserved for men who shaped their futures without ever learning their names. He began the speech the way he always did. Gracious, self-effacing. I didn't build this alone, he said. And the room nodded along, comfortable with the familiar humility. No one ever does. It was a line he had used dozens of times. Safe. True enough. Vague enough. He was about to continue when the screen behind him changed. Not dramatically. Not with a sound cue or interruption. Just a quiet transition, as if someone backstage had cued the wrong slide. A single line of text appeared beneath his name. Founding. Contributors A-list scrolled slowly, names the audience didn't recognize. Early engineers. Seed investors. Advisors who had long since faded into obscurity. Adrian glanced back, mildly annoyed. This wasn't part of the program. The contributors section usually came after the speech. If at all, the list reached the end, then paused, then added one more name. A name Adrian hadn't seen in years. The room shifted not audibly, but perceptibly. Like a collective inhale that didn't quite become a gasp, because someone had stood. Not from the front rows where donors sat. Not from the press section. From the aisle near the back, where no one important was supposed to be. A woman. Mid-30s, maybe? Dark blazer. Hair pulled back. Not severe, just practical. She wasn't holding a microphone. She wasn't waving or calling out. She simply stood when her name appeared. Alina. Adrian felt something cold move through his chest, not panic. Recognition. The applause didn't stop immediately. A few people clapped reflexively, assuming this was part of the ceremony. But the sound thinned, fractured, died in uneven pockets. The host froze. Adrian didn't move. Alina didn't speak. She didn't need. Because the screen behind Adrian didn't change back. It stayed. Name, title, Alina Rowe. Systems architect, uncredited. A murmur began. Low, confused, curious. Adrian leaned toward the microphone instinctively, ready to smooth, to redirect, to turn this into something manageable. But before he could, the woman stepped forward. Not quickly. Not defiantly, just forward. Each step felt louder than the applause had been. The host whispered something off mic, but Alina shook her head gently. I'm not here to accuse anyone, she said when she reached the edge of the stage. Her voice carried without effort. Calm, steady. I'm here because the story being told tonight is incomplete. Every camera in the room pivoted. Adrian's first instinct wasn't fear, it was irritation. Not at her, but at the disruption. At the timing. At the audacity of correcting a narrative that had already been agreed upon by everyone who mattered. He smiled slightly, the practiced expression of a man used to navigating awkward moments. Alina, he said. as if greeting an old colleague at a reunion. This isn't, she held up a single document. Not a thick file. Not a dramatic folder. 1 page. I won't take long, she said. I never do. The phrase landed heavier than it should have. She turned not to Adrian but to the audience. I designed the original architecture that made Keller's system scalable, she said. I left before the company went public. Not because I wanted credit, because I was told the story would be cleaner without me. Silence sharpened. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it, because somewhere in his mind, a realization was forming, slow, unwelcome, undeniable. This wasn't an ambush. This was a correction. And I agreed, Alina continued. At the time, it surprised him. I believed the vision mattered more than the name attached to it, she said. But visions grow. Stories solidify. And when a story gets repeated long enough, it stops being flexible. She turned back to him then, and tonight she said quietly, your story became permanent. Felt the room tilt, not because of what she was saying, but because of what she wasn't. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't asking for anything. She was finishing a sentence that had been left unfinished for years. The host tried again. Ms. Rowe, perhaps we can. Alina shook her head once more. I'm done, she said. And to Adrian, you can keep the applause. I just needed the record. She stepped back, sat down. The screen behind him remained unchanged. Adrian stood alone at the podium. The applause gone, the certainty gone with it. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. And for the first time, the version of himself the world loved felt fragile. The applause never returned. Not even a polite ripple. Not even the nervous clapping people used to smooth over discomfort. The room remained suspended in an awkward, brittle quiet as Adrian Keller stood at the podium, his hands resting lightly on the edges, his posture still impeccable. Only now, the stillness no longer read as confidence. It read as calculation. The host eventually thanked the audience, her voice slightly too bright, and guided everyone toward the reception hall with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to move past moments no one wanted to process in public. Adrian stepped away from the microphone without finishing his speech. Cameras followed him. Anyway, by the time he reached the side corridor reserved for speakers and donors, his phone was already vibrating in his pocket, alerts stacking. Messages multiplying faster than he could read them. He didn't check. Not yet. He paused instead in the dimmer hallway. The noise of the crowd muffled behind the heavy doors, and let his breath settle. Alina Rowe. The name felt heavier now than it had on the screen. He hadn't expected to feel guilt. That surprised him. What he felt instead was something closer to irritation mixed with unease, because nothing she'd said was untrue. That was the problem. A staff member approached, hesitating. Mr. Keller, the board is asking if you'd like to. Not now, Adrian said gently. The man nodded and retreated. Relieved not to be involved, Adrian adjusted his jacket and walked toward the private exit that led to the underground garage. He preferred to leave before the crowd could corner him with questions disguised as congratulations. As the elevator doors closed, he finally pulled out his phone. The notifications were no longer abstract. Who is Alina Rowe? Early architect claims erasure at Keller Legacy event. A missing name in a billionaire's origin story. He exhaled slowly. It would pass. These things always did. A brief storm of curiosity, then the cycle would move on. There was no scandal, no crime, no accusation of malice. Just a footnote people would forget as easily as they learned it, except he wasn't sure he believed that when he reached his penthouse. The city lights stretched endlessly below him, indifferent as always. He poured himself a drink he didn't need and stood at the window, playing the moment in his mind. Not her words, her tone. There had been no triumph in it, no demand, no plea, only finality. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. Alina returned to her apartment an hour later. It was small, clean, functional, the kind of place designed for living, not impressing. She placed her bag on the table, slipped off her shoes, and sat for a long moment without turning on the lights. Her phone buzzed. Repeatedly, she ignored it. She had expected this part, the messages from old colleagues, the sudden interest from journalists, the acquaintances who hadn't spoken to her in years suddenly remembering her existence. She had not expected how quiet she would feel. Not relieved, not vindicated, just done. She opened her laptop and pulled up a document she had kept untouched for a decade. Old schematics, early system diagrams. Her handwriting in the margins, sharp and precise. She had loved that work, and she had walked away from it without bitterness. What changed wasn't the past. It was the permanence. Stories, once engraved in marble and broadcast on stages, had a way of erasing anything not carved into them. Tonight, she had simply refused to vanish. The next morning, Adrian woke to sunlight cutting sharply across the bedroom ceiling. For a brief, disorienting second, everything felt normal. Then he remembered. His assistant's message waited patiently on his screen. "We need to talk." Today, so did 3 from the board and 1 from a journalist he respected too much to ignore. He showered, dressed, and sat at his kitchen island with coffee growing cold in front of him. Scrolling through the coverage, the tone was curious. Not hostile, yet uncredited contributor emerges, quiet correction at a loud celebration. Keller's legacy faces a question, not an accusation. That last one bothered him most. Because questions lingered, he called his general counsel first. "Legally," she said, "after reviewing the situation, there's no exposure. No breach, no violation. She hasn't accused you of wrongdoing." "I know," Adrian said. From a reputational standpoint, she continued carefully, "This is delicate. The absence of conflict makes it harder to dismiss." Was precisely it. There was nothing to fight, no villain to discredit, no lie to disprove. Only a narrative. Gap now visible to everyone. "What do you recommend?" he asked. She paused. Transparency, acknowledgement, carefully framed. Adrian thanked her and ended the call. He sat back, staring at the skyline again. Acknowledgement. He hadn't denied Elena's role. He had simply allowed the story to simplify itself. That was how it always happened. Complexity slowed momentum. Clean narratives attracted investment, confidence, belief. It wasn't personal. It was efficient, at least. That's what he had always told himself. He opened a file on his Tableton internal archive of Keller Systems' early days. The founding team photos, press releases, interviews. Elena's name appeared exactly where it always had in early drafts, then disappeared. He remembered meeting the advisor who suggested the optics would be cleaner with a single visionary face. The way Elena had listened, expression neutral, before nodding once. If that's what the company needs, he had admired her. For that, he had never asked what it cost her. By noon, the boardroom was full. They sat around the table, polished and composed, discussing messaging strategy as if the question were already solved. "We should issue a statement recognizing her contribution. Frame it as an oversight." "It wasn't an oversight," Adrian said quietly. The room stilled. He rarely contradicted consensus. "Then frame it as evolution," others suggested. "Early-stage contributions often go unrecognized until stop," Adrian said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We're not going to spin this," he said, "and we're not going to bury it." Several faces tightened. "That may not be advisable," someone began. Adrian stood. "For years," he said, "we've benefited from a story that made us easier to admire. That story is now incomplete. The question isn't how we protect it. The question is whether we correct it." Silence. Finally, one board member spoke. "What does correction look like?" Adrian didn't answer immediately, because he wasn't sure. Elena met the journalist that afternoon. She had agreed to one interview. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the recorder between them untouched. "Why now?" the journalist asked. Elena smiled faintly. "Because the story became permanent. Are you seeking credit? Compensation? No, she said. I already have both in the ways that matter to me. Do you resent him? She considered the question. No, she said honestly. Resentment implies expectation. I don't think he ever expected to need me again. The journalist watched her carefully. What do you expect now? Alina folded her hands. Nothing. I corrected the record. What happens next isn't mine to manage. That evening, Adrian stood alone in his office long after the staff had gone. The building hummed softly around him. He pulled up the draft of the statement his communications team had prepared. We acknowledge the invaluable contributions of Alina Rowe during the formative years of Keller. Systems it was adequate. It was safe. It was insufficient. He deleted it instead. He opened a blank document, and for the first time in years, he didn't write for investors or press or history. He wrote for accuracy. Outside, the city continued, unaware that a story it had already decided to believe was beginning slowly, uncomfortably, to change by the third day. The story had stopped being a question and started becoming a conversation. Not the kind Adrian Keller could redirect with a statement or soften with a donation. This one unfolded in panels, podcasts, and opinion columns, quiet, analytical spaces where narratives were dissected rather than consumed. How are legacies built? Who gets remembered and who doesn't? Is omission a form of authorship? Adrian watched it all from a deliberate distance. He had declined interviews, declined commentary, even declined to let his communications team monitor sentiment for him. He already knew what they would say. It's mixed, trending, thoughtful. Not hostile. That word thoughtful felt dangerous. Thoughtfulness lingered. It invited people to sit with discomfort rather than rush past it at Keller Systems headquarters. The atmosphere had shifted in subtle ways. Nothing dramatic. No protests or walkouts. Just a quiet recalibration. Employees spoke more softly in hallways. Meetings ran longer. Slides that once celebrated growth now included acknowledgments of early decisions that suddenly felt less neutral than they once had. Adrian noticed the glances, not accusatory, curious, as if people were seeing him not as diminished, but incomplete. That was worse. He stood in his office one afternoon, reviewing a timeline prepared by a junior researcher he hadn't met before. It mapped Keller Systems' rise year by year, highlighting moments of innovation, pivots, breakthroughs. Elena's contributions appeared in the first 3 years, then stopped. Why does it end here? Adrian asked, tapping the screen. The researcher hesitated. That's when she left. Yes, Adrian said. But the systems she designed, did they stop being used? No, the researcher said quickly. They're foundational. Then why does her presence end? He asked again. The researcher swallowed. Because that's how the story has always been told. Adrian dismissed him gently. When the door closed, he sat down, suddenly tired. Stories didn't just shape perception, they shaped memory. Alina, meanwhile, found herself adjusting to a different kind of attention. Not admiration. Not even praise. Recognition. People who had once overlooked her now listened carefully when she spoke. Invitations arrived not flashy, not lucrative, but thoughtful. Panels about early innovation ethics. Closed-door discussions with founders who wanted to avoid repeating history. She accepted a few, declined most. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. She had spent too long being invisible to crave another kind of distortion. Still, something had shifted internally. She found herself thinking, it's not about Keller Systems, but about Adrian, not with anger. With curiosity, she remembered him younger, quieter, less certain. A man still forming the edges of himself. He had listened more then, asked questions. Deferred when he didn't know. She wondered when certainty had hardened into armor. And whether armor, once cracked, could be set aside or only replaced. On Friday, Adrian requested a meeting. Not with the board, not with the press, with Alina. The request was formal, direct, unadorned. "I would like to speak with you privately." No agenda, no intermediaries. She read it once, then. Again, she didn't feel flattered. She didn't feel wary. She felt prepared. She replied with a time and location. A quiet conference room in a neutral building neither of their territories. Adrian arrived early. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching traffic move below like a living system, patterns emerging from countless individual decisions. He heard the door open. He turned. Alina entered without hesitation. No assistant. No preamble. They regarded each other for a moment. Two people bound by a shared past neither had fully owned until now. "Thank you for meeting me," Adrian said. She nodded. "You asked?" They sat. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was deliberate. "I want to be clear," Adrian began. "I didn't invite you here to negotiate." "I know," Alina said. "I also didn't invite you to apologize," he continued. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's new," he exhaled. "I invited you because I realized something after the ceremony." She waited. "I've spent years believing that legacy is something you protect by simplifying it," he said. "I told myself complexity diluted impact. That stories needed clean lines." He met her eyes. "I was wrong." Alina studied him, not unkindly. "Wrong about what?" She asked. "About what simplification costs," he said. "Not to the company. 2 people." She considered that. "And now?" She asked. "Now," he said. "I'm trying to understand whether correction is possible or whether I've simply arrived too late." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back slightly, folding her arms not defensively, but thoughtfully. "You're asking the wrong question," she said. He frowned, then asked the right one. She smiled faintly. "You're still thinking in terms of outcomes. Repair, resolution, closure, and you're saying those aren't possible?" He asked. "I'm saying they aren't owed," she replied gently. "Correction isn't something you do to fix what happened. It's something you live with afterward." He absorbed that. "I didn't come here for forgiveness," he said quietly. "I know," she said again. They sat in silence once more. Finally, she spoke. "When I agreed to step back," she said, "I believed the company needed a singular face. Momentum mattered. I made a choice." "I let you make it alone," Adrian said. "Yes," she agreed. "You did." The acknowledgement hung between them, not accusatory, not absolving, just factual. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately, because this time, the question wasn't rhetorical. "I'm going to tell the full story," he said at last. "Not in a footnote, not in a revisionist blog post. In the places where the simplified version has lived." She nodded slowly. "And when people ask why you didn't do it sooner," she asked. "I'll tell them the truth," he said. "That admiration is addictive, and certainty is comfortable." She smiled, not warmly, not coldly, honestly. "That," she said, "will be the hardest part." The announcement came the following week. Not as a press release, as a lecture. Adrian stood on a stage, not the one built to celebrate him, but one designed for inquiry. The audience was smaller, sharper, less forgiving. He spoke without slides, without applause breaks. He told the story from the beginning, including the parts that complicated it. He named Alina. He detailed her work. He explained the decision not as a betrayal, not as an oversight, but as a choice made for optics over completeness. "I allowed a version of events to solidify because it made leadership easier," he said. "I believed I was protecting the mission. In reality, I was protecting myself from complexity." The room listened, not with admiration, with attention. When he finished, there was no standing ovation, only sustained, thoughtful silence, which felt, to Adrian, like progress. Alina watched the lecture later that night alone. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt settled not because the past had changed, but because the future no longer required her absence to function. She closed the video and sat back. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying a correction that needed to be made. She had made it now. Whatever followed belonged to someone else. Adrian, standing alone backstage after the lecture, felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not redemption, responsibility. And for the first time, he understood that restoring a reputation wasn't about regaining admiration, it was about surviving without it. The silence that followed the lecture did not fade. It traveled, it seeped into conversations. Adrian never heard directly classrooms, boardrooms, private dinners where people leaned closer to their companions and lowered their voices before saying his name. Not because it was scandalous, because it was unsettled. The world knew how to process fallen idols. It had scripts for disgrace, for exposure, for public punishment. What it did not have a script for was a man stepping out of his own mythology voluntarily and refusing to climb back in. Adrian felt the absence of certainty everywhere. In the way invitations paused before arriving, in the tone of emails that opened with admiration but ended with questions, in the board meetings where people spoke more carefully, as if the ground beneath them might shift if they assumed too much. For years, he had lived inside a marble structure built of perception and performance. Now, there were cracks, and through them, something colder was coming in at Keller Systems. The immediate consequences were not financial. The stock dipped, then stabilized. Investors reassured one another. Analysts labeled the situation non-material. But internally, something had shifted more profoundly. A senior executive requested a meeting. "I want to revisit the origin story we tell new hires," she said, hands folded. "It's no longer accurate." Adrian nodded. "Change it." Another executive hesitated before speaking. "This has raised questions about other early decisions. People are asking whether there are other omissions." Adrian felt a familiar urge rise, the instinct to contain. To limit the scope? He resisted it. "Then we answered them," he said. The room fell quiet. This was new. Adrian Keller did not invite scrutiny, or at least, he hadn't. Late one evening, alone in his office, Adrian pulled open a drawer he rarely touched. Inside lay objects he had carried from office to office over the years. An early prototype, a handwritten pitch outline, a folded photo from the company's first rented workspace. He studied the photo now, for people stood in it. He had always remembered 3. He sat down. Heavily, this was the cost Alina had named, not the erasure itself, but the years spent living with an incomplete memory. Alina, across the city, experienced a different kind of turning point. She had returned to her consulting work, quieter now but more deliberate. Clients sought her not for prestige, but for clarity. One afternoon, a younger founder asked her a question that lingered long after the meeting ended. "How do you know when to step back?" the woman asked, "and when to stand your ground?" Alina had answered carefully. "You don't always know," she'd said. "Sometimes you learn years later." That evening, she found herself thinking about Adrian again, not with curiosity. This time with concern. She had corrected the record. But correction, she knew, could leave a vacuum. And vacuums had a way of pulling people apart. The board convened an emergency. Not because of crisis, because of discomfort. One member spoke first. "We're receiving pressure from partners, institutions, even regulators to formalize an internal review of early practices." "Audit?" Adrian asked. "Not legally," the member said. "Ethically." Adrian leaned back in his chair. This was the moment, the one where leaders often drew lines, declared limits, defended legacies, invoked practicality. He could feel the old instincts pressing in, contain control, clarify only what was necessary. He thought of Elena, standing quietly as the applause died. He thought of the lecture hall's silence, He thought of the photograph in his drawer. "Do it," he said. Several heads snapped. "Up. A full ethical review," he continued. "Not managed by us. This could uncover decisions that someone began." "That's the point," Adrian said. The board stared at him. Some with admiration, some with unease. He had just made himself unpredictable. The fallout was not immediate. It was gradual. Findings emerged. Not scandals, patterns, moments where efficiency had outweighed acknowledgement. Where speed had trumped inclusion, where decisions had been made cleanly and human costs left unexamined. Adrian read every report himself, each one stripped, another layer from the version of himself he had believed in. He slept. Poorly aches he had ignored for years settled into his shoulders. His back, for the first time since his 20s, he felt old. The public response evolved. Some praised him for transparency. Others accused him of performative humility. A few declared the entire exercise unnecessary. What mattered was not the reaction, but the loss of certainty. Adrian no longer knew how he would be received when he entered a room, and that terrified him. Not because he feared rejection, because he had built his entire sense of self around predictability. One night long after midnight, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse. The city lights blurred by rain. He had not invited anyone over. He had not scheduled anything for the next day. The calendar was emptier than he liked. He opened his laptop and reread the earliest emails he had exchanged with Alina, back when everything had still felt malleable, back when he had asked more questions than he answered. He realized with a quiet shock that he missed that version of himself. Not because it was nobler, because it was still learning. Alina received a message she hadn't expected, not from Adrian, from the board. They wanted her input on the ethical review, not as a symbol, not as a witness, but as an expert. She read the message twice, then set her phone down. This was not her responsibility. She had done what she came to do, but she also understood something. Adrian was only beginning to grasp correction once made created obligation not to the past, but to the future. She replied with conditions. Independence? No. Public credit? No. Narrative framing. They accepted. The turning point did not arrive with drama. It arrived with exhaustion. One afternoon, Adrian caught his reflection in the mirrored wall of an elevator. The face staring back at him looked thinner, less certain, and strangely, more real. For the first time, he wondered not what his legacy would be, but whether he could live without needing one. Alina walked into the review meeting the following week without ceremony. Adrian stood when he saw her nod as a gesture of respect, as a reflex. They nodded to each other. No words exchanged, no closure implied, just a people standing on opposite sides of a truth that could no longer be simplified. And for the first time, since the applause had stopped, Adrian understood that the collapse of his reputation was not the crisis. It was the beginning. The crisis did not announce itself. There was no breaking headline, no sudden loss of fortune, no public disgrace sharp enough to justify the weight pressing against Adrian Keller's chest each morning when he woke. Instead, it arrived as a slow erosion. Certainty, once his anchor, dissolved into a constant hum of doubt. Every decision, small or large, now carried an echo. Is this accurate? Is this complete? Who isn't in the room? Questions that had once been philosophical irritations became relentless companions. He had invited complexity into his life, and complexity did not leave when politely dismissed. Adrian found himself avoiding mirrors, not consciously. He simply stopped noticing his reflection until one afternoon, standing in the restroom of his office, he caught sight of his own eyes and startled. They looked unfamiliar, not hollow. Searching, he braced his hands on the sink, grounding himself in the cool porcelain, and waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. He had always believed that crisis came from lost money, status, power, No one had warned him what happened when you kept everything, and lost the story that made it coherent. The board meetings grew more tense, not because of conflict, but because of hesitation. Executives waited longer before speaking. People hedged. They asked for clarifications they never would have needed before. Adrian realized something unsettling. They were no longer certain what he wanted, and without certainty, they didn't know how to align themselves to him. That distance subtle, professional, unspoken, cut deeper than opposition ever had. Late one night, Adrian called the only person he could think of who might understand. Not a peer, not a mentor, a former professor from his university, a man who had once told him, "You confuse decisiveness with certainty." "They aren't the same," the man answered on the third ring. "I don't know who I am without the narrative," Adrian said without preamble. There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. "Good," the professor said. "Now you're learning." Adrian closed his eyes. "This isn't theoretical." "No," the professor agreed. "It's identity." They spoke for an hour. When the call ended, Adrian felt no better, but he felt less alone. Alina, immersed in the ethical review, felt a different kind of pressure. The work was meticulous, demanding, often uncomfortable. She read accounts from early employees whose contributions had been minimized. Not erased, but smoothed over, simplified. Each story felt familiar, not because they mirrored her experience exactly, but because they shared its shape. She noticed something else. 2. Adrian did not interfere. He attended sessions when asked, listened, took notes. Asked questions, then stepped back. It would have been easier if he had resisted. Easier if he had argued, defended, rationalized. Instead, he absorbed, and that absorption came at a cost. One afternoon, Alina stayed late after a review session. Organizing notes, she heard footsteps behind her. Adrian stopped a respectful distance away. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I know," she replied without looking up. He hesitated. "Can I ask you something not as a CEO?" She met his eyes. "Go on." "When you corrected the record," he asked, "did you expect this to happen?" She considered the question carefully. "No," she said. "I expected indifference, maybe annoyance. I didn't expect unraveling." He nodded slowly. "I thought integrity would feel steadier," he admitted. She gave a small, sympathetic smile. "Integrity is stable, but transition isn't." He absorbed that. "You're losing a version of yourself," she continued. "That always hurts, even if it wasn't the most honest one," he exhaled. The psychological crisis peaked not in public but alone, on a Sunday afternoon. Adrian sat in his penthouse, staring at an unopened invitation to a gala. That would have once been unthinkable to miss. He realized he didn't want to go, not because he feared judgment, because he no longer knew what role he would be playing. Visionary? Cautionary tale? Curiosity? He set the invitation aside, and for the first time in decades, he let himself do nothing. The stillness was unbearable, without motion. Without performance, his mind turned inward. Found no familiar landmarks. He felt a flicker of panic. Then something else. Grief, not for what he was losing, but for how long he had lived inside a story that required him to be admired to feel whole. He began seeing a therapist. Privately. Quietly, the therapist did not flatter him. She asked questions that dismantled assumptions. He didn't realize he was still protecting. "What do you believe admiration gives you?" she asked. "Safety," he answered after a long pause. "And without it?" "I don't know," he admitted. She nodded. "That's the work." Lena sensed the shift in him before he named it. He moved more slowly, listened longer, asked fewer leading questions. One evening, after a particularly difficult review session, she watched him sit alone at the table long after everyone had left. She approached cautiously. "You don't owe this process anything beyond cooperation," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I owe myself something." She studied him. "This isn't penance," she said gently. "Don't turn it into that." He looked up at her. "What is it then?" She thought for a moment. "Transition," she said, "from certainty to responsibility." Reports neared completion. Findings consolidated. Patterns. Acknowledged there was no villain in them, just a system that rewarded simplicity and punished complexity, and a man who had benefited from both. Adrian read the final summary alone in his office late at night. When he finished, he closed the file and sat in silence. He did not feel exposed. He felt unprotected. The armor of admiration was gone, and beneath it, there was no replacement, only himself. That night, Adrian dreamed not of stages or applause, but of the early workspace, empty. Dust motes floating in sunlight. 4 desks. 4 chairs. No hierarchy. He woke with tears on his face, and for the first time since the applause stopped. He did not wipe them away immediately. The truth did not arrive all at once. It emerged in fragments, small, precise realizations that accumulated until Adrian Keller could no longer tell where understanding ended and responsibility began. The final report from the independent review committee landed on his desk on a quiet Tuesday morning. No press embargo. No dramatic cover letter. Just a thick document and a note that read, "This is complete. Not comfortable, but complete." Adrian closed his office door and sat down. He did not skim. He read every page. The report did not accuse him of malice. That somehow made it harder. Instead, it traced patterns. How narratives formed. How visibility narrowed. How early decisions made quickly, confidently hardened into assumptions that no one later questioned, including him, including Lena. One section stopped him cold. Narrative consolidation phase, years 3 to 7. As public attention increased, the company increasingly centered its origin story around a single visionary figure. This was not mandated explicitly, but reinforced implicitly through media engagement, investor communications, and internal messaging. Implicitly, had never ordered anyone to erase names. He had simply rewarded the version of the story that made him easier to admire. Another passage followed. The absence of correction over time functioned as a form of authorship. Adrian leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Absence is authorship. He had not written lies. He had edited reality by omission, and omission, when repeated, became truth. He closed the report and remained seated long after the words stopped moving. This, he realized, was the core truth Alina had brought into the room, not accusation, not grievance completion. The story had not been wrong. It had been unfinished, and unfinished stories, when treated as final, carried a particular kind of harm. Later that afternoon, Adrian asked to see Alina, not formally, not as part of the review. He found her in a quiet side conference room, packing up her notes. "I've read it," he said. She nodded. "Then you know." "Yes," he said. "And there's something I need to say without response required." She looked at him carefully, then gestured for him to continue. "I spent years believing that fairness was about intention," he said. "That if I didn't mean to exclude, I wasn't responsible for exclusion." He paused. "That belief protected me." She said nothing. "I understand now that power changes the equation," he continued. "When your story becomes dominant, your silence becomes directive." He swallowed. "I benefited from not correcting it." The words landed heavy in the room. Alina exhaled slowly, not relieved, not vindicated, acknowledged. "That's the truth," she said. He nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added, "or validation. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what you meant when you said, correction creates obligation." She studied him for a long moment. "You've crossed the hardest threshold," she said at last. "What's that?" "Understanding that this isn't about the past," she said. "It's about how you live with the future, knowing what you know now." Public disclosure followed 3 days later, not as a confession, not as a defense, as a release of the full review. Unedited Adrian refused to attach a personal statement beyond a single paragraph. This report reflects not wrongdoing, but incomplete responsibility. I accept both the findings and the obligations that follow. The reaction was immediate, divided. Some praised the transparency. Others criticized the lack of apology. A few asked why anyone should care at all, but something unexpected happened. People began talking not about Adrian Keller, but about systems, about how stories were told, about who disappeared quietly while others became permanent. The conversation widened. And for the first time, Adrian realized the correction had grown beyond him. Alina watched the coverage from her apartment. Arms folded, expression unreadable. She felt no triumph. What she felt was release. The story no longer required her presence to remain. True, she had not been folded back into the narrative as a hero or a victim. She had been acknowledged as a fact, and facts, once established, no longer needed defending. Adrian's personal reckoning deepened, without admiration as a buffer. He noticed things he had once filtered out, how often people deferred to him reflexively. Rarely he had truly been challenged. How much of his confidence had been built on being believed. He began restructuring internal processes, not dramatically, not publicly, but deliberately. Decision-making slowed. More voices were invited in, not as symbols, as participants. Each change felt small, together. They felt like loss. Loss of control. Loss of simplicity. Loss of the clean lines that once defined his life. But beneath that loss, something else was emerging. Integrity that did not rely on being seen. One evening, Adrian received a message from Alina. "My part in this is finished. I'll be stepping away after next week." He stared at the words longer than he expected to. He had known this would happen. She had never been meant to stay still. The quiet finality stung. He replied simply, "Thank you for the correction." Her response came quickly. "Live with it well." On her final day, there were no speeches, no acknowledgments, no symbolic gestures. Alina packed her bag, nodded to the team, and left the building without ceremony. Adrian watched from his office window. She crossed the plaza below and disappeared into the city. For the first time, he did not feel the urge to follow, to reclaim, to fix. He understood now. Some people are not meant to remain in your story. They are meant to finish it that night. Adrian returned to the drawer in his office. He took out the photograph again. This time, he did not count faces. He studied expressions. He noticed details he had missed before. The way Alina leaned slightly forward, engaged, curious. The way he himself stood straighter. Less guarded, he placed the photo on his desk, not as nostalgia, as reference. The truth he had discovered was not about what he had done. It was about who he had allowed himself to become in the absence of challenge. And now that challenge had arrived, not as confrontation, but as clarity. The applause was gone. The armor was gone. What remained was quieter, more fragile, and, for the first time, honest. The confrontation Adrian Keller had been bracing for never came in the form he expected. There was no explosive interview, no public reckoning staged for catharsis, no demand for apology sharp enough to puncture what remained of his pride. Instead, it arrived quietly in a room without cameras, without witnesses, and without the safety of abstraction. The invitation came from Alina. One line. "Before I leave the city, I think we should speak once more. No agenda. No act implication. Just an opening." Adrian accepted immediately. They met in the same neutral building where they had first spoken weeks earlier. The room was unchanged. Plain table, soft lighting, no corporate insignia. Familiarity without intimacy. Alina arrived on time. Adrian was already there. They did not exchange pleasantries. They did not need to. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said, sitting down. This felt unfinished. Adrian nodded. I feel the same. She studied him, assessing not his posture or tone, but something deeper. You've changed, she said. Yes, he replied. Changed how? She asked. He considered the question carefully. I no longer believe admiration is neutral, he said, or harmless. I used to think it was something that happened to me. Now I see how much I curated it. She absorbed that. And what does that cost you? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, it cost me the ability to be wrong in public. She leaned back slightly. That's a heavy loss. It is, he agreed. And I protected myself from it for years. Silence stretched between them, not strained. Dense. Double quotes. I want to ask you something, Elena said at last. And I need you to answer honestly, not carefully. He met her eyes. I will. When I stepped back, she asked, did you believe truly that it wouldn't matter? The question cut deeper than accusation. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes, he said. She nodded slowly. That's the part people don't like to admit, she said. Not the harm. The belief that it wouldn't count. He felt something tighten in his chest. I didn't think of you as replaceable, he said quickly. I thought of the work as transferable. She smiled faintly. Same outcome. Different language. He absorbed that. I want you to know, he said, that I see now how that belief shaped everything that followed. I know, she replied. That's why I asked. The confrontation did not escalate. It deepened. Elena spoke of the years after she left of rebuilding, of watching the company grow without her name attached to its origins, of the strange dissonance of being proud and erased at the same time. She did not dramatize. She did not soften. She spoke as someone no longer seeking acknowledgement but clarity. Adrian listened, not as a leader, as a witness, when she finished. The room felt different, lighter. Not because anything had been resolved, but because nothing remained unspoken. There's something else, Adrian said. She waited. I need to tell you what I lost, he said. Not to compare. Not to balance scales, but to complete the picture. She nodded. Go on. I lost the ability to be surprised by myself, he said. Everything I did reinforced the same story. Visionary. Decisive. Right. You disrupted that. And for a while, I resented you for it. She met his gaze. I know. Now, he continued, I see that what I resented was the mirror. She smiled this time. Genuinely, that's usually the case. The confrontation reached its peak, not in anger, but in choice. I'm going to ask you something, Adrian said, and you're free to refuse. She inclined her head. Ask. I want to publicly name the full origin story, not just in records or lectures, but in how I speak about the company going forward. That includes you, permanently. She considered this carefully. This isn't about credit, she said. And it isn't about redemption. I know, he replied. It's about truth. She held his gaze. And what happens, she asked, when that truth complicates the story people want to believe? He answered without hesitation. Then they'll have to believe something harder. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Double quotes do it, she said. But don't make me a symbol. I won't, he said. You'll be a fact, she smiled. Good. They stood. The meeting was over. No handshake, no embrace. Just shared acknowledgement at the door. Elena paused. There's one more thing, she said. Yes. You don't owe me anything, she said. Not recognition. Not loyalty. Not repair. He nodded. But you owe yourself honesty, she continued. And honesty, once practiced, becomes inconvenient, smiled ruefully. I'm learning that. She opened the door. Live with it well, she said. Again, then she left. Adrian remained in the room long. After he felt no triumph, no relief, what he felt was integration. The story no longer existed in fragments, public and private, admired and hidden. It was whole, and wholeness, he realized, was heavier than myth. the next day. Adrian spoke at a small conference. No announcement, no press release. During a discussion about innovation, he said simply, "Keller Systems didn't begin with a lone visionary. It began with a collaboration, one of which I spoke about incompletely for years." Named Alina, he described her work. He did not dramatize. He did not justify. He moved on. The room did not erupt. It absorbed, which was exactly the point. That evening, Adrian walked through his penthouse without turning on the lights. He stood at the window, city spread below, and felt something settle inside him. The confrontation had not restored his reputation. It had dismantled his dependence on it, and that, he realized, was the truest reversal of power he had ever experienced. The morning Adrian Keller woke, without the need to rehearse himself. He almost missed it. There was no surge of clarity, no dramatic sense of arrival, just a quiet absence where a familiar pressure used to be. For years, his first conscious thought each day had been forward-facing. What must I maintain? What must I reinforce? This morning, there was only stillness. He lay in bed longer than usual, sunlight pooling softly across the ceiling, and realized he wasn't bracing for anything. That, more than any headline or acknowledgement, felt like resolution. The city continued as it always had. Markets opened. Meetings convened. Narratives formed and dissolved without him at their center. Adrian moved through his days differently, now not slower, but less armored. He spoke with more pauses, asked questions without steering the answers, let meetings end unresolved when resolution felt premature. Some people admired the change, others found it disorienting. Adrian accepted both. Reactions with equal calm. Keller Systems did not collapse. It did not reinvent itself overnight. Instead, it matured. The origin story was revised, not streamlined, not dramatized, but expanded. New hires received a longer version, one that included tensions, missteps, and names that complicated the clean arc of success. The company did not lose prestige. It gained depth. Adrian watched this evolution with a distance he had never allowed himself before. He no longer needed to be the axis around which everything turned one afternoon. He received an email from a junior engineer. "Thank you for naming the full story. It made me feel like I don't have to disappear to belong." Adrian read it twice, then closed his laptop and sat quietly for a long time. Alina, across the country, settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. She consulted selectively, taught occasionally, lived deliberately. The attention faded. As she knew it would, what remained was steadier. She no longer corrected stories. She helped people write better ones from the beginning. Occasionally, she saw Adrian's name in the news attached to initiatives that moved slowly, deliberately, without spectacle. She felt no ownership over that, only quiet recognition. Months passed. Adrian found himself declining. Opportunities that once would have felt essential. Awards, panels, profiles. Not out of disdain but disinterest. When he did speak publicly, it was often to listen more than to assert. People noticed. Some misread the change as a retreat, others understood it as evolution. Adrian no longer felt the need to correct either interpretation. One evening, he attended a small gathering, no stage, no spotlight. A former colleague asked him, half joking, "Do you miss the applause?" Adrian smiled. "I miss what I thought it gave me," he said honestly. "And now?" "Now I know it was never the applause," he replied. "It was the certainty." The colleague nodded slowly. "Do you regret losing it?" Adrian considered the question. "No," he said. "I regret confusing it with safety." On the anniversary of the lecture that had changed everything, Adrian returned to the drawer in his office. He took out the photograph. This time, he did not see absence. He saw context. He framed the photo not prominently, not as tribute, placed it on a shelf behind his desk, not as a monument. As a reminder, the resolution did not arrive with reconciliation or reward. It arrived with alignment. Adrian Keller no longer lived in conflict with his own narrative. He did not need to defend it. He did not need to simplify it. He lived with it. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Adrian walked through the city without an entourage. No one recognized him. No one needed to. He stopped at a cafe, ordered coffee, and sat by the window watching people pass. For the first time, anonymity did not feel like Ari's. It felt like freedom, miles away. Alina closed her laptop after a long day of work and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the sky wide. She thought briefly of the stage, the applause that had died, the silence that followed. Then she let it go. The story was finished, not because it had ended, but because it no longer needed to be corrected. That evening, Adrian returned home and stood at his window one last time. The city lights shimmered below, unconcerned with legacy, indifferent to reputation. He raised his glass knot in celebration, not in farewell, in acknowledgement of the truth, of the cost, of the freedom that came from no longer needing to be untouchable. And in that quiet moment, Adrian Keller finally understood a legacy isn't what survives you. It's what stops requiring your absence to exist.